Joining the discussion tonight on the rising tensions with Iran is Middle East analyst Micah Halpern. Micah, rhetoric on both sides is clearly ramping up, heating up tonight. We want to listen a little bit more very quickly to what President Trump said when asked about Iran today.
We'll see what happens. It's going to be a bad problem for Iran if something happens, I can tell you that. They're not going to be happy. They are not going to be happy people. Okay? You can figure it out yourself. They know what I mean by it. Okay, does anybody else have a question other than these two?
All right, so the president warning Iran. Iran has been warning the U.S., saying an aircraft carrier in the region is a target, not a threat. How close are we realistically here to some kind of conflict?
Well, there has been conflict in the past that hasn't escalated into a large operation. It's important to recognize. So I can't tell you right now that it was Iran, but I could tell you that in the past Iran has done similar types of things. I can tell you in the future they're going to do similar things also. I can tell you how they do it. I can tell you why they do it. And it's important to recognize that this is a tool that Iran uses. They use it not just in this area. They use it in the Straits of Hormuz also, which is about 85 miles away. For the viewers, they need to know that a third of the world's oil goes through this region every single day. And they don't need to close the straits. All they need to do is frighten or change directions or even sink two ships. And that will shut down a tremendous amount of this waterway.
So assuming that this was in fact Iran that carried out these sabotage attacks, or perhaps one of Iran's proxies in the region that did this, both are entirely possible. Mm-hmm. Is this their way of saying, if you're going to the U.S., if you're going to choke off all of our money from selling oil and prohibit us from selling oil to the world, this is what can happen?
Well, we're going to respond back, is what they're saying. We're responding. Iran actually has teams of naval groups that actually function on these low rubber boats. They're swarming boats. It's an unbelievable concept. They go literally below the radar. The radar can't scan them because the radar doesn't go that low, because if it did, it would hit the dolphins that are jumping in the sea, so to speak. So it literally goes below the radar, and they appear, they hit things in the ground, and they've actually hit American vessels. They've kidnapped American naval personnel. They've done all of this stuff in the past, and nothing really has happened. Trump, I think, will respond if something does happen, though, but it won't become an all-out conflict for sure, because it's not in any of their interests to do so. However, this is a very important game of chicken.
We keep hearing, though, that now you have the British who are afraid that this could escalate into a conflict by accident, because you have so much of a buildup in the region now, and you have the threats on both sides.
The issue of accidental escalation is a huge concept in war in general, in the history of war, and the concepts of war, and the strategies of war. That's why you need cool heads on both sides all the time making decisions. The problem with this presidency also, and the problem with Iran, is they both tend to bluster. And as a result, you can't really tell what they are going to do. You only hear the rhetoric. And when it comes to an argument of rhetoric, analysts and people like you and me who are trying to figure out what's really happening are sort of in the dark, because it's all about rhetoric right now. But the reality is now we're seeing action, and the action we have to see in steps. And right now we're seeing a slight escalation in the steps, but not necessarily a movement to war.
Let's talk a little bit more about the rhetoric, because as you've been saying, there's been quite a bit of it, and we've heard quite a bit of it. How likely would Iran be to follow through on its threat to retaliate against Israel if the U.S. strikes against Iran?
Well, it wouldn't be Iran that would strike against Israel. It would be Iran, exactly. So, in other words, it's the proxies. Iran in general has a history, not just of decades, of hundreds of years of having other people fight their interests outside. They really are not an attack force from Iran out, but rather they use their proxies in general, and they're enormously effective at it. So if we were to count, I would say there are close to 30,000 rockets in Hamas's hands, but there are close to 300,000 rockets in Hezbollah's hands. That's a huge amount, and no Iron Dome can protect Israel against that.
Let's look back. Year was 2011. You had Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, along with then you had Ehud Barak by his side, who were talking about, or they wanted to put together a plan, or they had one to actually strike Iran. Now that everything is kind of escalating the way it is that something that you feel as though that they could be talking about again?
It's an issue, and I've got to tell you that Israel has plans in order to strike first or to respond. They have that. And now, for the first time in a very long time, they actually have a yellow light. They had a red light until then. And it's the red light, green light kind of phenomenon that you've got to realize. And they had a red light under the Obama administration, which is important. Israel is prepared. There's no question about that. But they wouldn't necessarily strike Iran. They would strike Hezbollah first and hit the Iranians in their range, which is what they've been doing. A lot of Iranian military casualties from Israel, by the hands of Israel, in Syria and in Lebanon.
Very quickly, Secretary of State Pompeo's visit to Brussels. What do you feel as though the main goal of his trip was? Do you think it was more to talk about the Iranian nuclear deal, or do you think it was more to try and rally support if the U.S. did get into a conflict with Iran?
Pompeo is the Secretary of State of the United States. As a result, it's a thankless job and is almost always uphill. It's a battle constantly because the Europeans especially do not see eye to eye with the United States on almost every one of these issues. So what he has to do is he has to go there and not just drum up support, he has to actually explain the principles of the United States, which are not easily convinced, the Europeans are not easily convinced of those issues because the Europeans in general have a conservative attitude towards what's going on, especially in the Middle East. They don't want to get involved, and if they do get involved, they don't want to be involved directly. And so this is the issue. Pompeo and Trump are saying, no, we're going to have to either stand behind Israel or get involved directly. It's going to be an interesting challenge.
All right, Micah Halpern, it's great to see you. Thanks for being here.
Always a pleasure.